Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to speak about self-concept. Self-concept refers to person's cognitions that describe the self in contrast to self-esteem, which is evaluative in nature. The self-concept is very descriptive in nature. The self derives from past experiences that organize and guide the processing of the self-related information contained in an individual's social experiences. Self known to our friends is not the same self known to our families. Therefore, the self-concept refers to different groups of people in the society. On the other hand, there's a sameness and continuity or similarity in our stream of consciousness. During the late medieval period, knowledge of the self was not being considered very important. There was a little concern for introspection and self-reflection about personal behavior. More emphasis was given on the spiritual soul, on what happens after death, and on relations, collective salvations. An increasing trend in social mobility and decreasing trend in social hierarchy was found in the late medieval period, in around 1500s to through the early 1700s. As a result, emphasis was on the sense of self and was reflected by birth status or occupation began to decrease. At the same time, emphasis was given on private self began to increase. During the 1600s, 1500s to 1600s, people believed that self-hidden aspect of the self decided inside each person's that was quite different from the individual public image. People were concerned that people's public emphasis did not necessarily reflect their private beliefs and values. Self-consciousness, objective self-awareness, a case of situationally induced. Placing people in front of mirrors increases their private self-consciousness by creating a sense of state of objective self-awareness, a condition in which people are made more aware of their internal feelings and beliefs. The self attempts to unify this body of research in other aspects of self-control and self-regulation. The control theory model proposes that people regulate their behavior by making a series of comparisons against pre-existing standards until the behavior matches those standards. In the control theory model, a self-focused attention helps to determine the nature of the pre-existing standard. This is the self-focus of attention which is inward in nature. The individual likely to use a pre-existing internal standard of comparison. On the other hand, if the self-focus of attention is outward, the individual is more likely to use a pre-existing external standard of comparison. According to the control model theory, self-focused attention creates feedback loop that results from continuously comparing modifications in behaviors to a pre-existing standard. When the behavior meets the pre-existing standard, the loop is broken. Basically, objective self-awareness, it includes a situationally induced sense of self-consciousness. And the control theory model includes the model of behavior using a feedback loop on a pre-existing standard to regulate the actions of self-conscious and objectively self-aware individuals. Self-monitoring. People vary in the traits of self-monitoring. This trait refers to different self-observation and self-control of expressive behaviors and to self-presentation. People with high in self-monitoring are very sensitive to social cues about what is appropriate behavior in a particular given situation. They are very much aware of how they appear to others, and they modify their behavior based on knowing what is most appropriate in the particular situation to create a desired impression. This leads to high self-monitoring towards behavior differently in various situations. Depending upon the circumstances, the construct of self-monitoring links the relationship between the public appearances and private reality of self-concept. Identity orientation. When you speak about identity and orientation, it's another approach towards the conceptualization of the private and public dimensions of the self. As is basically the identity orientation framework proposed. Identity orientation refers to the extent to which people focus their attention and effort on their internal characteristics or external environment when defining their identity. Identity orientations are labeled as personal, social, and collective in nature. Self-monitoring is a very important and influential aspect of the self-concept. Most people think well of themselves and desire to increase their esteem. Loss of esteem. Identity deficits arise when people reject some beliefs or values or ambitions that they have been taught or have long held. To have an independent self-constructual, it is to focus on the things that make oneself stand out as different and special. Independent self-construals are predominant in Western culture, European and North American style. Independent self-construals are more common in Asian cultures. In our culture, maturity may require the male to reject parental teachings and find his own identity, but a female may do just fine to remain close to the values and goals her parents taught her. Self-esteem may be of very little value under normal circumstances, but in response to adversity, people need self-esteem to keep their spirits up and to keep striving for different positive outcomes in their life. Self-esteem is does a valuable resource. It does correspond well with the actual limited benefits of self-esteem, especially the emotional benefits and the improved capacity to persist in the face of failure. But it is not clear that people want self-esteem merely in order to have a resource in case they encounter misfortune. Even when times are good, people seem to want self-esteem.